everybody. I'm here with Devan Sood. Actually, literally just minutes after I finished listening to a podcast that you were on recently, I just finished listening to you on the My Latin Life podcast with Vance. So I've spent an hour and a half listening to you in this parasocial relationship where now I know you a little bit. But it sounds like you might have been listening to Remotely Serious. So we might have that both on each other. If I, the intro that Vance made it sound like you'd listened to an episode or two. So not to put you on the spot, but welcome, David. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And yes, I have been listening to a lot of Remotely Serious. I actually know one of your former guests, Brett from Insured Nomads. We were just talking today. We were scheduling time to chat and catch up. So it's good to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, Brett was great, great company, and also he had an amazing background and an amazing microphone. So he was a legend of a guest. Even though this is audio only, I still enjoyed seeing him and talking to him about Insured Nomads and the journey that they've been on. So let's dive right into it. So you're the co-founder of Orca Pass, and maybe just as a bit of an introduction, my experience with, I'm not going to say nomad living, but a certain kind of alternative living was way back in the old days of 2015 and 2016. I had a venture backed startup, and I'm a Canadian that moved to New York in order to continue the startup and service our first customers and all that kind of stuff. So I came from Western Canada to New York. And it's one of those things where, like, okay, I'm going to go to New York. Didn't have a lot of money. Like, I wasn't that far in my startup journey. And I didn't have a lot of, heft of like, well, I'll just use my savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for a year of apartment living in New York. I was literally like, okay, I'm gonna have to figure out something else. Like, am I gonna have to stay in a hostel the first month? And so I found an alternative co-living space. And way back when, it's crazy to think how long ago it is now. It doesn't seem that long ago with the pandemic time, but not, now going on 7 or 8 years ago, I landed in a co-living situation, and we'll get into all that kind of stuff in the podcast. But long story short, it just was the first experience of opening my eyes to alternative forms of living. And it sounds like, fast forward through a lot of global events and a lot of remote work trends being pulled forward with what happened during the pandemic, and you've got a company that's also offering not co-living, but an alternative form of living.
100% right. Yeah, we think that in the future that 12-month lease is not going to make sense in a remote work world. And if that's going to be the case, if remote work is going to continue to accelerate, we need to start answering the question of where are people going to live? And if people are going to start moving from the major cities and no longer required to be in Manhattan for a Manhattan-based job, then we need to create an infrastructure for them to be able to be flexible, not only in where, but also when.
When did you start living nomadically, and how did you get excited about this idea enough to pursue it as a mission?
Great question. So I left my last job last March. I was working on growth at a startup, and it was a lot of fun, learned a lot, but I had a very quick realization that I wanted to jump back into being the founder. And I didn't know what I was going to work on. What I did know was that out of all of the amazing founders that I've met, one of the common themes is that they are obsessed with their work on a different level to the point where their personal mission blends into the company's mission and they're almost one unit together. And that's why the Brian Chesky's of the world have been able to do amazing things over the last 15 years. I decided very quickly, like I said, that I wanted to jump back into being a founder, but I didn't know what I was going to work on. I decided to take 3 months off, go to a little beach town in Mexico where I had never been before, just kind of get away from my environment in order to think and meditate, figure out what I wanted to do. At the same time, I also invited a couple friends to come with me. They were working remotely full time at this point. This is uh, spring of 2022. And the theme that kept coming back to me was I'm obsessed with culture. I'm obsessed with experiencing other people's culture. I'm obsessed with helping educate people about my culture and also helping other people experience new cultures, opening their worldview. And that's where this all started, actually. This started with my obsession with culture and how do I get people to experience more cultures. So the first version of Orca, way back in the day, over a year ago now, was actually just me trying to get everybody I knew to come down to Mexico and work remotely for 2 or 3 months. I had already set
What
up
part
this
of
great
Mexico?
place in Playa del Carmen. We'd found this great place, beautiful studios, rooftop pool, amazing views, the whole shebang, within reasonable price range for a monthly stay as well. And so like I mentioned, convinced a couple of people to come with me the first time. And one of the things that clicked for me that time was one of my friends, when we got back to the US, he told me that that was his first time ever leaving the country. And I was like, you trusted me just based on a bottom line number that I gave you to be like going to a different country and working there for a month? And he was like, well, you had the confidence, and all I needed was that much confidence, and it was great. And I was like, okay, very interesting. So I tried to get everybody else to do the exact same thing. I was like, okay, if this guy can do it, then everybody can do it. So I tried to get everybody to come down to Mexico. And one of the pieces of feedback that we continued to get was, man, this sounds great. I'd love to come to Mexico for a couple months, totally within my budget. Looks awesome. But I've already got this 12-month lease in LA or in New York or in SF. And I can't rent it out. I can't just ditch it and pay twice. I can't Airbnb it. It's against the rules. I'm kind of stuck with it. And so maybe when I'm not stuck in a 12-month lease, then we'll talk about it. And very quickly, me and my co-founder realized, okay, there's not an actual business there if we can't get people to do it all year. So we need to figure out like how to make this thing even more scalable. And at the same time that we were getting that type of feedback, we also got a Y Combinator interview. And in the interview, I mean, Michael Seibel just ruined us. He tore us apart, but gave us great feedback. The
What's one
part,
thing he said that was critical that you can share?
yeah, yeah. One of the things he asked us, and keep in mind, this is a very nomad focused product, right? We were including co working and health insurance and travel insurance and all the other things that you would want to see in like a full experience. Um, One of the things he asked us was, how does this, the same way that Airbnb went from conference goers to families of four, how do you go from nomads to families of four? They were totally sold on that nomads needed a different way to live, but they didn't understand how this would scale past that. And back then, we didn't really have the insights that we do now. I'm not even going to tell you the answer we gave, it was so bad. But we didn't have a good answer. This is the long story short. So, me and my co founder basically shut down shop after that interview, actually. We were like, oh my God, they're right. How do we continue to scale this past just nomads? And we shut down and decided to kind of relaunch a separate MVP a couple months later. That MVP is now what we know as Orca today, which is a membership community all about the housing, all about different, making it easy to live in different places. And so it kind of evolved from my passion for helping people experience new culture, which is definitely the same mission I'm still on today, all the way into what the product is in order to get that mission into the world.
What was the main thing that pivoted or the tweak that was made from the version 0 that we'll never see to this new, more successful version 1 of Orca Pass, if I can call it that? It's relatively new.
Yeah,
What did you change in this pivot period post YC revelation
yeah.
moment?
Yeah, the biggest realization that we had was that people really valued our ability to curate the housing. Because we said, hey, this is the best place to stay in Playa, all of a sudden people were really excited about that place to stay. They didn't really need, not everybody wanted the co-working and the health insurance and the travel insurance and all the other stuff we were trying to bundle in, but everybody really valued our ability to curate this housing.
Right.
So we decided to double down on that. At the same time, we realized that if we're curating housing and we're trying to do monthly rentals, then really what we're doing is creating a different way to rent an apartment. And if we can create a different way to rent an apartment, then we can put a serious dent in what the 12-month lease is today. And so that's how we decided to kind of go down this avenue. We're still catering to the people that are already location flexible and have the ability to work from anywhere. But we think that the future of this is a significantly better rental product. We think that the rental product today sucks. It's brokers and fees and deposits and moving and furnishing, so much cost and time and headaches that we put up with for basically to be locked into a 12-month contract.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense, but forever we've had to put up with it because we've never had the leverage as renters. Because, like I said, if you have to be in Manhattan for your job, then you got to pay Mr. Manhattan whatever he wants on that rent. That's just how it was.
Yeah.
And so now the tables are turning, the leverage is switching, and if Mr. Manhattan decides to raise his price, we can just get up and leave. And so because of that, we're starting to demand more from what our rental is. And so we're going to introduce technology and flexibility and all the things that are going to optimize the experience for the people renting.
What nationality tends to be your first early adopter best customer so far? As like you're just a really high level breakdown between like Americans, Europeans, other.
Yeah, so we're still relatively new and small. So our circles have kind of extended from where me and my co-founder started. We both live in the US, so a lot of our circles are US tech people, and that's kind of how we got started. I'd say a lot of, I think over 80% of our customer base is from the US right now. And that's
Yeah.
also why we launched New York and SF and LA first, is because if we're going to really replace the way people rent, replace the 12-month lease and put a serious dent in that, then we've got to go where people are already considering home. And we've got to
Mhm.
be able to replace rent at home before we even think about helping them travel throughout the rest of the network as well.
So I heard a nice little, I wouldn't say it's not a metaphor, but I heard a nice little rubric where you placed your Orca Pass offering in between Airbnbs on one side and then the 12-month lease on the other side. And so one
Yeah.
thing I'm curious about, and it still stems from me asking you about like what nationality are your customers, is the idea that when I was a co-living customer, and in some ways when I've been a nomad, and I actually the pandemic, I don't want to say forced me, but the pandemic, the natural the natural evolution of the pandemic happening meant I was in Airbnbs for like many months at a time, actually thinking like this is the last month and then I'll get a lease. This is the last month once we flatten the curve, once this variant happens. And there was actually probably 10 to
Yep.
12 months where I was in 10 to 12 different Airbnbs waiting to kind of settle. And the settling didn't happen throughout 2020 and 2021 for global
Yep.
pandemic reasons. And one of the things, so I have this co-living perspective, the Airbnb perspective. One of the things about Airbnbs is that you mentioned in your podcast on My Latin Life, they are really set up for vacations, and vacations are a legal thing that people can do on a tourist visa. They can just sort of come to San Francisco from anywhere in the world, go on vacation. They can go to Mexico, go on vacation. And then leases, in my experience, way on the other end of like signing a 12. I'm in a rental lease right now in my hometown at this period of time, and they're kind of like, give us your SSN, what's your employment, do a bunch of due diligence on you, and some of that might just be for the peace of mind of the landlord that just wants to do things the way they've always done. But there's also kind of this legality thing in the sense of, lots of people do all kinds of things to live a nomadic life. And I'm not some goody two shoes that says like follow the exact letter of every law. But like technically, a European cannot just sort of uh, chill in San Francisco and work for 3 months, even if they wanted to, and they quickly used Orca Pass. You can't.
Right.
Technically you can't do that. Same with Mexico. All kinds of people go down, and like I don't even want to say it's hard to do, and it is in some ways legal to do it. I just don't want to give legal advice, but people do all kinds of things to get
Yeah.
around the world, and so I'm just curious how where this fits in the terms of, so the landlords are just like, a landlord in San Francisco is just kind of like, oh yeah, cool, whatever, don't do diligence on them. Are they passing that risk on to you? Because although the customer experience is, it's annoying to do a 12-month lease, the fact that they diligence people and ask for your income and all that is not there for no reason. It's there because landlords have gotten burned and tenants have rights, and and like things that are bad for the tenant can happen. So it's I've seen several generations of this where it's like, wouldn't it be great if you just totally smash the landlord tenant relationship? It's hard to do, and when you start out, it seems like it's so obvious, but then you realize, okay, yeah, there's reasons for everything. How have you thought about that kind of legality and visas, and like, can people just travel around the world and stay in places? Do you pick certain countries where that are more permissive? And again, I love global nomadism. I'm not saying this like I'm trying to rain on the party. I'm just curious how you think about like legality and whether, who stays where and can they stay anywhere in the world. Does that fit into the current regulations for tenancy law? You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Great questions. A lot of points that I want to hit on there, but I'll answer your question the most direct way I can. First thing I'll say is I also do not provide legal advice, so don't take any of this as that. The way that we think about it is governments are going to come around to this, right? Let's take a step back and think about the progress we've already made. There's tiny little countries like Estonia that have released a digital nomad visa where now it is technically legal for you to go live there for 6 to 12 months and be a remote worker living, earning income from anywhere else. That's totally fine with them. And they have earned a crazy amount of economic impact because of that legislation, legislative change. We've seen other countries follow suit, and they've also benefited extremely in their economies. So if these tiny little economies are opening their walls, to remote work and allowing people to live there and contribute toward their economy, then that means somebody else is losing that in their economy, right? So whatever the Estonians get from the US customer base means that those US customers are not spending it in the US. If that's going to be the case, and we kind of extrapolate out from there, that means that the US is going to see a dent in their economy based on the number of digital nomads like working around all over the world. If that's going to be the case, then they're going to have to do something about it kind of in response. They're going to be a late bloomer to the whole trend because that's just how big countries with big bureaucracies are. But they're going to have to do something about it in order to recover from that economic impact. So I think, we're going to see a lot of the small economies kind of get the better of the system right now. I even just heard an interview with the president of a tiny Pacific Islander nation called Palau. They're doing a lot of different things in the digital nomad space to allow for remote workers to come live there.
Yeah, we've
And
interviewed Jay from Palau on this podcast.
oh yeah,
Great, great program.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so they've got all these things going on, and uh, the bigger countries are eventually going to have to follow suit in order just to save face, basically. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're
Well,
very
I would just
early.
jump in there. I
Yeah,
actually think this is interesting because similarly to exactly what you're thinking or what you're saying here, I saw the proliferation of 50 to 60 to 70 digital nomad visas, and it did seem to play out like a um, I don't even want to say second tier countries, but countries with smaller economies than the G7 saying, we're going to
yep,
compete with the G7 by saying, come here instead. London is expensive, Melbourne's expensive, Toronto's expensive, New York's expensive. But in the last month, Canada said, we're going to do a digital nomad visa. I think the details are just being finalized, but they announced it enough that they've crossed the Rubicon and they're committed to it. I imagine they'll release it within weeks, if months, if not weeks. And I feel like that is a turning point where a G7 country who traditionally might have said, like, we don't dabble in this stuff. We're not some Caribbean island. We're not some offshore tax haven. We don't do this stuff, has now saying we're going to do it. And so I do agree that the US and the UK and France will probably be the slowest of 100 countries. They'll do it last.
yeah.
But we're starting to see signs that even quote unquote top 15 economies are jumping on board with the nomad visa.
Yeah, and we're still very early on in this adoption cycle as well. Let's think about like how we look at remote work. Remote work was accelerated due to COVID, and to be quite honest, we're still not that good at it. We're maybe 85% good at it, as good as we are in person, but the 15 to 20% is extremely deeply felt. It compounds so quickly. You can really understand it when you already have a history of work that you're comparing to, and these giant companies have spent millions and millions of dollars on enormous offices and compounds and campuses, right? The infrastructure that we already have is not set up for remote work, and yet it's continued to accelerate anyway. As the tooling gets better and the software gets better and our ability to work remotely gets better, then as the adoption kind of takes over from there, we're going to see the acceleration of all these governments start to hop in also and figure out what their part in all this is. So absolutely, we're still early in this adoption cycle, but I think that the next 5 years is going to hold a lot of growth for the space.
Speaking of early, you're early in your journey, but maybe zooming forward to the end by way of example, there are adjacent companies that don't do exactly what you do, but they've maybe made a similar bet on some general trends. And I'm talking about Selena and Sonder. They're they're in a position now where they, maybe they're a little bit older. They started in the last generation and they built up a venture type company that raised money. I think in both cases raised a lot of money sequentially, and then I think both of them went public in a SPAC transaction. And David, I got to tell you, those stocks are absolute dogs right now. They SPAC it,
Down
whatever.
80, 90%.
Whatever it is,
Yeah,
like it's $10, the SPAC is always $10 and then boom, absolute. And it's not even like, oh, there is volatility. It's just straight down into the right, until it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, and then it's 50
yeah,
cents, and now it's 40 cents. And if I just took a quick look at Selena's balance sheet and income statement, and it looks like truly they have 6 to 12 months of cash that's burning all the time, and they just did an emergency round, what it looks like. And so I'm not trying to like, I mean, I've been to Selena's. Selena is like a really popular name amongst
yeah,
nomads, setting aside the Wall Street side of things and just looking at them as a consumer product. Very popular with nomads. It's co-living, almost dorm life, and they're betting on a similar trend. But my point is, I've seen a lot of companies that's a current situation, but over multiple generations where there's early stage growth success where someone bets on the world is changing, people want different accommodation, different types of living, they raise money, they grow, that really is a trend. But like in Selena's case, they have not figured out how to be profitable. And so it doesn't seem like this whole space has that kind of unicorn that actually figured it out, IPO'd, and is still growing, and of course, like the whole market's kind of in a downturn, but these are really bad situations in terms of the price of the stocks in SPAC. So
yeah,
I'm kind of leading the question a little bit by talking about that doomsday stuff a little bit, but it is kind of to frame it and say, are you already looking at this is kind of a cash flow profitable business from day one? I see the vision, or do you need to eventually do some venture capital and grow? And of course, knock on wood, raise the venture capital and not have the same situation where you're IPOing and going to the moon. Does this business model, if you look at it, 2-3 years out, does it need capital to grow, or can you be cash flow profitable in whenever you flip the switch in 6 months, theoretically? Because I know you're
yeah.
early.
Great question. Great question. Let's talk about the two companies that you mentioned real fast. The commonality between Selena and Sonder, besides their stock price being down 80, 90%, is that they both are in two different businesses, right? They are both the technology platform and they are the owners and operators and or lessees of the property itself, right? So they are the property managers and the technology,
Like we work.
um,
Yeah, in a
just
way.
like we work.
Yeah.
Uh, in fact, very similar story we're seeing, right? WeWork and Selena and Sonder are all down 80, 90%. All three of them now are sub $200 million companies, and their assets are over $100 million. So really, we're talking about like a couple $1 million in their branding value, and that's basically it now. Um, the problem with that is that when you're a property manager and the technology platform, you tend not to be that good at either one. And we've seen a lot of these. There's a couple others in the US that I'm not going to mention also, but there's a lot of different players that are investing in building the buildings and furnishing the furnishings and making sure that they are in complete front to end control of everything. The reason that's not the best is because then you're not that good of a property manager and you're not that good of a technology platform. And so the whole experience becomes pretty subpar.
Can
I
we
myself have stayed
is
in,
there
yeah,
anything, can we dig into that a little bit in the sense that
yeah,
I'm trying to go for even like one more insight into it, because like Amazon can do cloud servers and sell books, Apple can make software and sell rectangles. Is there something specific where it's hard to do two things? Because there are companies out there that are good at two things. Is there something that kind of clashes? Is there a clash of incentives, clash of focus? Like, why do you think it's hard to do those two things? It seems like marrying them together would be this decacorn, and I agree that they're not doing it well. But is there something there that causes that where other high growth companies might be able to do two things?
Yeah, I think there are a couple companies that figured it out. If you think about like the traditional hotel chains, right? They are the property managers and they also have their own technology platform. But
Hmm.
then they also use booking.com and Kayak and all these other distribution sources for their marketing. And they spend a ton of money on marketing also, right? So these are not small business type scale ventures. You really need to know what you're doing in every single geography in order to make this work. Um,
Yeah, they
what
are
we
spread out
found is
across
that,
geographies. Yeah, that's true.
yeah, and they try to do it super similarly all over. And the matter of fact is that not everything needs to be the same everywhere. Um, the the standard the standardization of the rooms in Salinas is really nice for the backpacker who's going to stay 3, 4, 5 nights. Not as nice for somebody who's going to stay there and really wants to experience the culture over the term of 3 months. Totally different type of person, totally different type of customer, in fact. So I think that it's possible to do. I'm sure one day there will be, I'm sure there, I can think of actually a couple of regional property managers that have a technology backbone that do it really well, but they're not national, international growth companies. They know that they're going to be in one region for a really long time before they're able to expand, kind of following the hotel chain model. And so I think that the companies we're talking about, Selena Sonder, they're in multiple countries all over the world, trying to standardize units everywhere they go. And I don't think that that makes a lot of sense when you don't know what you're doing all that well. So, really cool idea, especially when the unit economics make sense in a less expensive place, but not the same experience that needs to be translated all over the world.
So you're not taking on all of the capex and leases and liabilities that these other companies that
Yeah,
we've mentioned are doing, but you are expanding into multiple countries. And so, what's it like when you want to launch a new city? Like, for instance, I saw on your website, Dubrovnik, Croatia, coming soon. So, with you or your co-founder, or maybe you send in your airborne paratrooper division, they parachute into the city. Your mission is to get a bunch of rentals that we can use to build the network of our platform. How does that work? How fast can you do it, and what's it like when you launch a new city?
great question. Yeah, we're down to have it. We have a really good process for this now. What we do is kind of the same thing that you do, right? If you want to go to a new city, the first step is understanding the city, understanding the neighborhoods and the points of interest and the different pockets of the geography, understanding kind of more in depth than just picking the hotel brand. Once we understand which geographies we want to be in, we'll go into that geography on various different websites. We'll scrape 1,000 listings or 2,000 listings that are already doing month-to-month rentals, furnished flexible rentals in that place. We'll throw every single listing into a giant data table, and we're getting really good at assessing the value based on ratings and reviews and neighborhoods and price points and amenities, understanding what good value is. We'll narrow it down to the top 20 property managers, try to like physically schedule tours at those buildings as for as many as we can. And then once we figured out what the top 5 listings are, those are the first 5 we're going to go with. So you'll see in some locations that we have relatively new that we've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 listings, and that's because we are 100% confident that is the best listing in the entire city that we could find at that price point. So, for example, we've got this place in New York, in Williamsburg. Great unit, awesome building, rooftop breakfast. I mean, it's awesome. It's about the same. It's about 10% more than what a 12-month lease would cost there. So you're not actually spending a significant amount more. We've even gotten a discount over the retail price. And that one unit, though it's only one listing, actually represents 18 units that they have. So we found, okay, this is the best place. There's 18 of them. We can offer them to our members. So we put that listing up, very confident that that's going to be the best place you can find. So to answer your question, yeah, we sent a member to Dubrovnik. He's living there for a month. Now my co-founder is going there right now to do the rest of the launch, and we're gonna have the whole process done inside of 2 weeks.
So you said you sent a member. So almost this is
Yeah.
a quasi team member, but also customer has volunteered.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. We started getting some inbound demand from our members for destinations that we haven't launched yet. So this member came to us and he was like, "Hey, I really want to go to Dubrovnik, but I see you're not there yet. Can you help me out?" We were like, "Yes." So instead of physically scheduling the tours, we did all the same research. We scraped 1,000 listings and found the best property managers and basically just handed him on a silver platter. Here are the best 10 that we could find, and you can go ahead and pick a unit and we'll go ahead and create the relationship with the property manager and get the better rate and do it on Orca and everything like that. So he picked his unit. We created a relationship with the property manager, uh, who has another 20 units as well, and now we're going to be able to launch there with significant ease.
So the property manager has 20 units. So you're looking for partners in the regions that do you prefer that they're not mom and pop? This is my one apartment, or that they are someone who has some experience and says, yes, I can, you work with me, you're getting 30 apartments as opposed to
Yeah,
one. Is that your strong
that's
preference for how to launch?
it's specifically our launch strategy. And the
Yeah.
reason for that is because we're trying to balance depth and breadth, right? We want to be in enough places and enough destinations that it makes sense for you to consider this valuable. We also want to make sure that we have enough places in that destination for you to have your option of what sounds good to you. So when we go to a new city, we'll try and find a property manager that already has 10, 20, 30 units. The reason for that is because now we have instant breadth with that property manager. We probably have a scale of, $1,500 to $3,000 in rent, and we can offer different units at different price points. If we find a property manager that we like that has really high quality, in all likelihood, their other units are going to have a very similar high quality. So it gives us the reliability to be able to trust that, okay, if we're going to go to this destination, we're going to launch with this property manager, we're going to instantly have access to 10 high quality units. That at a minimum is what we look for. That being said, we have after launch gotten inbound from mom and pop property managers that say, hey, we've got this one place, we'd love to host it on Orca, and we're happy to do that also. So it's definitely both, but our launch strategy is to go find a property manager that has a number of units already.
That's great. I'm excited about your product. I'm just trying to think through. Like I am learning about it and trying to contrast it with other things and hear from you. But overall, it's the kind of thing I was dreaming about. Like, why do we have to pay these Airbnb cleaning fees, or on the other hand, have a 12-month lease? The thing though is that with the established things, whether it's Airbnb on the one hand or 12-month leases on the other hand, as I was mentioning earlier, there's kind of case law and the history of precedents for things to happen. And so I'm just curious, maybe nothing bad has happened and nothing bad will ever happen. But if someone happens to show up somewhere and there was pee in the toilet, or there was something they didn't like, or the
Yeah,
fridge was dirty, and they just have a negative experience with a property, maybe it hasn't happened yet, but how do you see yourself handling that? Because tenants and landlords can't get away from that. They war with each other. And of course, we know Airbnb isn't perfect all the time. There are Airbnb disputes that, as an ongoing cost of doing business to be Airbnb, they would love to probably not be in the middle of things, but they find themselves having to refund, mediate, listen to people, bestow judgment on different cases in the court of
yeah,
Airbnb. How, as you scale up, I'm sure the fact that you're curating very well means this doesn't happen very much. But as you scale up, are you bearing any risk in the middle? Is the ultimate arbiter for a resident of one of the Orca Pass properties? Ultimately, do they just have to go to the property owner and say, like, you're on the hook if I don't like something? Or are you planning to step in and mediate that kind of thing if it happens in the future?
yeah. Great question. Knock on wood, we have not had that happen so far. You're absolutely right that due to our extreme curation, we're extremely picky about the type of property manager and the type of property that we go with. So everything's been great so far. That being said, the best part about this whole thing is that we have no problem kicking a property off our page. No problem. If for some reason the expectation does not meet reality or does not seem to be a good value, or if the property manager wants to increase their price 50%, we just won't list it. That's all good. Because we really want to be the best at all times, right? So we have an extremely high standard, and that goes for our members also. If a property manager comes back to me and says, "Hey, this member trashed our unit," and like look at all these videos, then I'm going to go back and kick the member off the platform too. So we're extremely aligned in creating the best of the best, not only for the sake of our property managers and our tenants, but also for the sake of the Orca community at large, right? We eventually want to be able to scale a global community of members everywhere you go. And if you get the guy who's trashing units everywhere he goes, that's probably not the type of person we want to be associated with. So yeah, we have an extremely high bar. We want to make sure that people are really treating the units like home, just like they would anywhere else that is home for them. And we have no problem kicking a property manager or a unit off of the platform if it doesn't meet those standards.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just curious, is the next thing for you really just running a playbook and just in 100 different cities in 100 different places, running the playbook to scale up? Or is there new tech or a product roadmap that you have in front of you? And sort of how big's your team? Do you did you quickly throw together some no code stuff to make the site work? Or do you have to build things from scratch that are really new and innovative? What's the scaling of the operations and the tech look like in the next year or two?
Yeah, great question. So my team right now is just me and my co-founder. It's just us. I am launching all of our South American destinations. I'm currently in Medellin, Colombia. He's launching all of our European destinations. He's currently in Split, Croatia, going to Dubrovnik very soon. And we've got a couple members launching in a couple different Asian destinations that one of us will eventually go launch as well. So yeah, we're all over the place. In terms of scaling the technology, we created that ourselves. So the marketplace that you see was created by my co-founder. He spent 6 years as an engineer at Microsoft and 2 years as an engineer at a company called Mojo Vision. Extremely talented guy, you wouldn't even believe. So we've been very lucky to create everything super quickly, all from scratch, and we're building on top of kind of foundational building blocks that already exist. But everything you see is us. Everything you see is our custom work. So in that sense, it's going to be relatively easy to scale. We've already got the systems in place to be able to scale. Of course, there's going to be a couple technical hiccups every now and again, but nothing that we think is going to be overwhelming to us. In terms of what the next step is, yeah, to jump back to your last question also, we will be raising money, but the raising money is going to be to scale up those destinations extremely quick, right? The thing is, there's a couple other companies in the world that if they wanted to create a similar monthly product, they would be able to do so faster than us, simply based on how many different listings they already have, right? So our goal is to find the best listings in 100 different destinations by the end of next year. If we can be in 100 different destinations by the end of next year, we're going to be relatively untouchable. Like maybe not perfectly untouchable, but we're going to be the front runner in this space for sure. So that's our goal. We're planning to scale up very soon. In fact, this month we're gonna go out to go fundraise, and we're like I said, we've already got the systems in place. Now it's just about pouring fuel on the fire.
Maybe switching gears a little bit, what kind of remote work or nomad content do you consume? Do you read a lot or listen to a lot or kind of follow the digital nomad influencers on the various platforms? Or are you heads down in this company kind of like ain't nobody got time for that? Basically, how do you when you want to go to 100 different cities, how do you kind of mix data with like, oh, I heard this person say this was up and coming on a podcast? Do you mix a kind of data driven approach with listening to stuff online and watching YouTube videos and making choices on that about like where the future is and the best places for you to
Yeah.
grow?
Absolutely, absolutely. Part of it is very member driven. Like I mentioned, we had a member who wanted to go to this place, so went to go launch that place. That was it's a no-brainer for us to be able to do that because we already have member demand for those places. The places that we don't already have member demand for are a little bit tougher for us. What we're finding is that um, the best way to go into a new place and have our own base set up there is if there's already a kind of a hotspot layer of nomads that are there. So yeah, I do a bunch of listening. I'm a podcast junkie. I will listen to like hours of podcasts a day, and certain data points that we also take into consideration. For example, there is legislation that just went through New York where they're really stamping down on short-term rentals, and the market for longer-term rentals has jumped 50% in the last week. So we're focused on that, saying,
So would
okay,
your service be still legal under their
yeah,
new enforcement of Airbnb crackdowns?
100%, because our minimum is 30 days. So we don't do any rentals under 30 days. Because of that, we avoid a lot of the short term legislation. So absolutely, we're looking at that. There's also kind of more um, qualitative approaches. So, like, even just thinking about what happened in Hawaii recently, we know that Maui is facing an economic crisis where their tourism is tanking. They're losing $6 million a day, I heard the other day.
Yeah, my brother
And so
got
now we're
married there.
looking,
People listening aren't gonna see this, but I was just in Lahaina,
oh,
like,
beautiful.
weeks before it all burnt down, and it's horrible.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible. So we want to be able to go launch a couple places in Hawaii and contribute to the economy there and be able to be uh, show our face and say, hey, we really want to be able to contribute here as well. Things like that we're also taking into account. So it's a combination of all of the above members, what they're telling us they want to do, what the data says they should do, people where people want to go, and also kind of qualitatively thinking about like, okay, these are the next places that are going to be up and coming for longer term rentals. So yeah, we're taking all of the data into account that we can.
And maybe for some of our nomads, some of our listeners who are nomads who are listening, who like the business shop talk, but also like to get tips on just where they should go. What do you see as up and coming? If we were to say, hey, we all know about Bali and Lisbon and Madeira and other places that are the top 10 or 15 on the Nomad Trail, is there anything you're seeing, maybe where you're launching, that wouldn't necessarily be something you think of as on the tip of your lips about as a workation or remote work or digital nomad destination, but you're excited about for 2024?
Yeah, great question. There's a couple places in India that I really wanna launch. We're really excited about that. I think that the tourism industry in India has been severely underserved in the last couple decades. Back in the '80s or '90s, there was a campaign to bring tourism to India, and it worked for 5 years or 10 years. The problem is they still run the same campaign, and it doesn't work anymore.
Mhm.
And so I'm excited to bring some of these ideas over to India. There's a couple places in South America, even in here in Medellin, Colombia. I mean, the quality of life is just so absurdly high that I'm having a hard time leaving. Um, I know there's a lot of digital nomads that are rolling their eyes listening to me go, "Oh, Medellin, Colombia, we were there 10 years ago, and it was only $500 a month back then." Well, I think get over it, and like, it's still an amazing place to be. It's still relatively affordable. Everything here is still really nice.
Yeah, we,
Um,
we all know that Canggu in Bali was awesome in 2016. Get over it. Like
right.
now is now. Yeah.
Exactly. So, there's a couple of these spots that have been historically definitely nomad hotspots that I think are still really hot and still really awesome. So I'm excited for some of these as well.
Can I ask on the India point?
Yeah.
I think I'm a little older than you, although we're both rocking some beards that no one will see because this is an audio podcast. But I'm in my 30s, and I feel like when I was really young, teenager, there was the backpacker trail, like one generation, even a little bit pre Tim Ferriss, like when I was a teenager. And then
Yeah.
Tim Ferriss came along and kind of did the 4 hour thing. But in those days, there was Thailand from people watching Leonardo DiCaprio on the beach, and kind of the end of the 90s turning into the 2000s, India was also kind of somewhere you might go backpacking. Very alternative, very counter for a North American. It was very alternative, but it was there. And it was a place that you might go to go find yourself in a slightly old fashioned way of thinking about everything, and not maybe the most
Yeah.
global thinking, a little bit of like the North American wants to go find themselves. But yet it was popular. But I don't find that in the previous, since 2015, people, nomads like interesting cultures that have a decent cost of living, hot weather, and yet India didn't emerge when people were looking for places with hot weather and a decent cost of living, and all that kind of stuff. It seems like there should have been 4 or 5 Indian destinations that became nomad hotspots. And there are places that have decades of history, like Goa, or a brand that kind of dates back to an older generation of backpackers and hippies. But I don't really feel like Indian destinations emerged in the consciousness of like, well, you got to go here. Just like
Yeah.
Portugal, you got to go here. Do you know why that is?
Yeah.
So I'm
My guess
excited to
at least.
hear that you're looking at it for the future. But do you know why it didn't
Yeah.
pop?
Yeah. My guess at least is that the infrastructure was just not ready.
Right.
Um, Remote work is a foreign concept to us. Working over the internet is a foreign concept for a lot of people in India in the year 2005, when all this stuff kind of maybe started to pop off a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, Only in the last 5, maybe 10 years maybe 10 years, has India really started to invest in the infrastructure. Now, everybody's got a cell phone. You couldn't even say that 10, 15 years ago, that everybody had a cell phone. Now, everybody at least has a cell phone. A lot of people speak English. Now, there's a service and a tourism industry that is thriving. Now,
Mhm.
there are infrastructure for good fiber optic internet to be everywhere. Now, there are property managers who are doing the Airbnb thing. So all these things started to emerge very, very recently. And I've gone to India a couple times, and I've seen the evolution every single time that I go. And so it's wild to see at the pace at which they're progressing. And I think that in 2024 they're going to have a stellar year for the tourism industry.
Great. Yeah. No, it's a place I'm interested. I've never been, and I'll be interested to see what you do there. Have you followed
Yeah.
the political conversation that might be? I think it's overblown a little bit, or at least overreported. But we have seen in the last year in Portugal and in Mexico City, the locals complaining about gentrification, rising
Oh yeah.
rents. Nomads fuck off, nomads go home, you don't belong
Oh
here. This
yeah.
is gentrification. You're offering you are offering above average, higher end types of accommodations in destinations around the world, and many of the people who will be making use of them are Americans. Do you do you have to grapple with that kind of political conversation, or is it sort of heads down? We don't have to like that's not our problem. Do you think about that much in terms of your
No,
strategy?
I think about it all the time. The way that I look at it, and the way that we've seen it play out so far, is the reason that happened. Let's take Portugal for example, right? Great example. What happened in Lisbon was you saw the digital nomad visa kind of be uncovered. Then a whole suite of people move over to Portugal. All these Airbnb people hosts were the ones benefiting from it, and they started to realize, like, oh my gosh, these people are all coming over here for months at a time. We should raise our prices. So what happened was, of course, the prices tripled, quadrupled in some cases. Now all of a sudden, people are paying U.S. prices for a place in Portugal. And what happened was, you saw the exodus out of Portugal. All of the pricing remained the same, and all of a sudden, all the locals are pushed out and they're screwed. The way that we look at it is we have extreme control over the pricing. Like I mentioned earlier, if a place does not match the price and the value for that location, we're just not going to list it. So you're going to get a really nice one bedroom here in Colombia for $1,000 to $1,200. That's just going to be how it is because that's the prices here in Colombia. We're not even going to let you find a $3,000 one bedroom anywhere in Colombia because we know that that's going to be outrageous no matter what. That's just not how things are priced here. So we're very focused on keeping the value strong. And if we're keeping the value strong, that means we're keeping them at least close to in line with what a 12-month rental might look like. So it's not going to be exactly the same thing. It's not going to, it's, there's going to be some sort of upcharge on the property manager side just based on them furnishing it and knowing the unit economics of everything. That being said, it's never going to be outrageous. So you're never going to see the sort of price inflation that you saw on a platform like Airbnb where the hosts were in control of the price. That's just not the case on Orca. So we lock in prices for the next 12 months based on seasonality. We have all those listed out already. If a price increases past a point that we can justify it, we just won't list it. So yeah, we're extremely in control of the supply, and because of that, we can kind of have a handle on the control of the pricing as well.
Do you take any percentage of the rental fee as a commission from the owner of the property?
Even better, I save you rental fees. I don't take any commission or fees or charge. I'm not a broker. I'm not none of that. I'm a community manager. What we do is we'll go find a place. Let's say it's $1,000 a month. That place that's $1,000 a month, we'll actually negotiate it down to maybe $900 a month or $800 a month. And that is because we're going to do all the communication for them, right? We're very concierge to you. So we want to make sure that we're offering to do the communication for them and we're doing all the marketing for them, right? Airbnb is not doing any marketing for them. We're creating, in their eyes, kind of the Michelin guide of rentals. So we have a very strong marketing resource for them as well. Because of that, we get this little discount. And that little discount, I'm actually taking and passing on to you. So now that the place that if you wanted to go direct is $1,000 a month, through Orca, it's only $800 a month. And it becomes an exclusive price you can only get through Orca. It's a great incentive to stay within the network once you're already in it, and allows us to build really good relationships with property managers also. So it's a win-win-win for everybody.
When you are in the early stages of sourcing a relationship with a property manager, what are some tells that this is great? They're going to work out. They get it. And what are some tells that it's just not going to work out? We should probably wrap this meeting up, or we should probably not take the next meeting. How do you?
Yeah,
This isn't something that there's a part of this that I feel like data can't. At a certain point, you got to sit across from someone who has 20 properties
for sure.
and assess their personality in a way that's thousands of years old, in terms of merchants doing business, and not something that you can do with modern data science necessarily.
Totally.
How do you assess property managers on that level?
Yeah, I'll tell you, once you've seen 2 or 3 units from a property manager, it's really easy to understand what their quality, uh, what their standard for quality is, right? If I go in and I don't see if I see 1 fork in that property, it's just not going to be for us. It's very clear to me that they have not thought about the long-term tenant. They are very focused on vacation rentals. That's totally fine. That's their market, but they're not going to be somebody who's qualified to rent to us for a long time. If I will literally go, I mean, I must have toured, I don't know, hundreds of units at this point all over the world. And yeah, we're getting really good at understanding what good quality is and what not so good quality is. If a property manager doesn't know what speed their internet's at, maybe they're not going to be a good fit. If a property manager hasn't outfitted their property with pots and pans and forks and cups, probably not going to be a good fit. I mean, these are all things that we can say to them and try and turn them into a good fit. But as far as looking for somebody out of the gate that's going to be a great fit, those are kind of the things we look for. We also are like doing our diligence. You know, we're checking their reviews. We're checking their properties on different platforms. We're doing the physical tours. I'm literally there doing speed tests with their Wi-Fi inside the building. So I'm making sure, yeah, when they say it's 250, it's actually 250. Those are all things that really matter. Those are all things that I'm sure your audience has dealt with these headaches on day one where you move into a new place and there's one fork and you're like, gotta go buy silverware now. That sucks. We're going to do as much as we possibly can to streamline all of that out and to make sure that all of the units that we're listing are extremely high quality. And so we hold ourselves to a really high bar also. And because, we've got this high standard, we've seen all the units in the world, we know what good value looks like, we're able to tell pretty quickly.
What do you think of some of those businesses that are doing fractional ownership, where they will source a property and then split it out 8 ways, I assume, take a healthy margin on doing that act, or managing that act, and then sell it one eighth, one eighth, one eighth to 8 different parties, often in places like Tulum and nomad destinations. How do you think of that as a business, and just sort of as a customer? Did that ever interest you when you were in the early stages, or what do you think of that emerging trend?
Yeah, it's interesting. The reason it hasn't appealed to me personally is because if I'm gonna spend that amount of money, I want it to be somewhere I'm gonna be for a while. And typically with some of these products, the whole idea is that you can be there whenever you want to be, but that's not really like the value does not meet the expectation of what I want. So for
Yeah.
me, that didn't really work out. What I think of the business as a whole is really interesting. I just think that home ownership is really difficult if not done straightforwardly, like in a legal sense.
Mhm.
And so I think it's going to take a while, but again, we're in the early innings of these things. Eventually, somebody's going to figure it out and have a good answer for it. I just don't think that, maybe it's going to be on the blockchain, maybe it's going to be tokenization. I have no idea. But I think that eventually we will get there. Of all the products I've seen so far, I have not seen a value that's like, oh my gosh, I have to hop on this right now. Versus if I'm already living out of Airbnbs, like you said, you lived out of Airbnbs for a year. I can't even imagine the amount of fees that you paid over that year. And so if I'm already living over Airbnbs and then a product like Orca comes along where it's literally just replacing that with a better value prop, then that is a much bigger no-brainer for me than buy a home in a place that you've never been where you're only going to be once a year. That's not as attractive to me.
David, it's been great having you on the podcast. I'm just curious what you're most excited for in 2024. Something you're launching, somewhere you're going, literally anything. What are you excited about?
Yeah, wow. There's a bunch of things that we're doing that are really exciting. Um, I'm excited to be in 100 destinations. I'm excited to be able to
How
provide
many
that much
now?
value.
How many are you now?
We're in 11 as of today.
So you're gonna
We're
10x
going to
it.
be in,
10x it.
yeah, we're going to be in 15 by the end of the month. We're probably going to be in like 25 by the end of the year. So we're in a pretty good place to be able to be in 100 by the end of next year. I'm really excited for that. Some other stuff that we've got coming, the global community that I talked about, I am extremely excited to be able to provide people with a community everywhere they go of other Orca members. That's going to be awesome. What we already do is hire local city experts to be kind of the person on call that has all the answers about that city in case you ever have any questions. And we're going to turn those local city experts into local community managers. And they're going to be able to host these local experiences. So in Mexico, it might be a cacao ceremony. In Colombia, it might be going to a cafetera. In the US, in LA, it might be going to the beach. Whatever it is going to be extremely specific for that locale. And I'm really excited to have created shared experiences for people all over the world that are extremely unique in that sense.
Well, we've never had a repeat guest, but I'd like to put a little reminder on my calendar for around Christmas time, New Year's time, holiday time. At the end of 2024, I'll put a reminder to check back in with you. And if you're up for it,
Let's
we
do
can
it.
we can jump back on the pod and talk about the 100 places that you're in by then, in
Perfect.
a short 15 months from now, as you hyperscale. But thanks again, David, for coming
Yeah.
on the pod.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. And I do have a little treat for your listeners also.
Yeah, I was gonna
We're,
say, maybe you can tell us the URL of Orca Pass, where people should go if they want to sign up, and also
yeah,
a little promo code that we've cooked up together. Mostly you, but
yes.
I'll take some credit.
So you can find us at orcapass.com. It's ORCAPASS.com. and we're at OrcaPass on every social platform also. So you can just find us at OrcaPass. I myself am at Devan Sood on every platform also. So please DM me and tell me how excited you are about this. I would love to hear from you. And if you're excited about it, definitely go to the website, sign up for a membership. We are offering all remotely serious listeners 40% off, which is the best deal and available literally anywhere. I'm not even giving my families that much. So please sign up for it. If you're not ready to rent with us yet, there's an option to reserve your membership. It locks in a lower membership rate and gives you a discount for life. So definitely do that and hope to see you in one of the community events somewhere.
Great. Devin, we'll put some or all of that in the show notes as well. And people can look you up and head over
Perfect.
to Orca Pass.
Awesome. So excited to see you all.